This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I'm Kevin Randle. For those of you interested, this is part 2 of my discussions with Tom Carey. We had a little bit of a technical problem with part of the first segment, but we're back here live and in color, I suppose you could say, with Tom Carey. When we went away, Tom and I were discussing some of the aspects of the Roswell case that did get a lot of talk. We mentioned briefly MJ-12. I believe it's a complete and total hoax and just diverted attention, is what kind of annoyed all of us for a period of time. I think Tom kind of agrees with that. It was just a useless diversion of resources, investigative time. One of the other things that came up in that time frame that I think follows the same sort of is the alien autopsy. What was your thoughts when that came about? And of course, we now know it's a hoax, but what were your thoughts when that all broke on the scene?
That was, I'm sure you remember, we went down to Roswell, you and I, and we were on a panel. I think it was a Japanese film company.
Yes.
And I, right up front, Kevin, I thought that was a hoax because the body did not resemble anything that was described to me as what they looked like. I thought it was somewhere, and I think they wanted all of our opinions at the end, and I think my opinion was, okay, guys, where did you get the body? You know, something like that. It was not what was described to us. I thought it was either a Hollywood prop or some sort of deformed human with some condition that I didn't know, but I knew it wasn't what it was cracked up to be. And
well, you in your education, you got almost all the way to a Ph.D. in anthropology. I think you were physical anthropology.
Physical, yeah.
Which, in essence, would make you a kind of an expert on that sort of thing, I would think.
Well, I know a lot, and it didn't conform to anything that I was familiar with. So it just I don't know, the shape of the head, the shape of the body, it did not conform to any stage of human evolution at the time that I was aware of. And given the fact that they were saying it was a alien creature from, I don't recall if they said it was from Roswell or something else, but it was not what was described to me as to what they looked like. And I think that the fellow Santilli, didn't he at one time confess that it was a hoax, or
No, Santilli said that they recreated a bunch of the footage because the tent footage, which was part of the film canister, supposedly was too dark for them to really broadcast. So they recreated it, and he admitted that they had done that. The guys who put the whole thing together, they've come out and they've shown pictures of the various stages of how the creature was made and what they did to do that sort of thing. The
other thing, Kevin, was that in that video that they were, the video to me looked like it was hooked up to make it look old. I thought that's not real age. That's hooked up age to make the video look old. And
the thing that caught my attention was the footage of the wreckage that they had, footage of the wreckage, and there was one I-beam in there, and there was the English word video on it. It's stylized and everything else, but what are the odds you've got an alien civilization that's created a written language, and we're going to be able to recognize an English word.
And they had 6 fingers, if I recall.
Yes. Yes.
And the doctors that were doing the autopsy, they were wearing masks, not to protect them, but to prevent us from seeing who they were. That was my conclusion.
Yeah, there
So
was a lot of,
I never from right from the get-go, Kevin, I did not think that was real.
I didn't either. I was somewhat hopeful because that would end the whole thing. But the other sad thing, as I understand it, they made literally millions of dollars off that hoax by selling the complete videotapes of the complete footage that they had recovered. So it wasn't everything you'd seen on television, wasn't all the footage they had. And they, of course, licensed the thing around the world, literally around the world. So they had made literally millions of dollars. And I kind of wish I'd have thought of it because I could use millions of dollars.
I'm with you there.
Is there any other aspect of the Roswell case that diverted your attention to the exclusion of where you wanted to go, or where you would you could have spent better somewhere else? Well,
Kevin, I never thought of myself as a writer. I believe that you have a gift of writing. I believe you like to write.
Yes,
and you certainly do. For me, it's always been a struggle to even when I'm writing. I've co-authored a number of books with Don. The actual writing phase, I say, oh my God, I'm going to have to remove myself from society for the duration of writing this book. And it's always been a struggle, or at least I'd rather be doing something else, But the thing about Roswell is that for something to occupy my attention for 30 plus years has to have something that's grabbed my attention. And Roswell was that thing that grabbed my attention for 30 years. And every day I thought about it. What can I do today? Am I going to interview somebody? I mean, it was something I never expected. In fact, after I took my first trip to Roswell in 1993 with you fellows, I think it was when they were filming the movie Roswell. And I thought, well, I've been to Roswell. That's it for me. And that was actually the start. And so it's I believe right now I've gone as far as I can with the case. Everybody's.
You'd said you were retiring from ufology and you weren't going to actively seek new leads, but you said something just came over your desk in the last week or 10 days.
Yes.
Caught your attention.
Yes, I know. No sooner did I say I'm okay, folks. I'm out of this. I get a phone call from a fellow in Florida, and he said that he's calling me because he had just bought our book called Roswell, the Chronological Pictorial, part of which you can see up above me. I always keep it there. And he said, I opened the book and I saw a picture of a fellow named Walter Hout. And he says, oh my goodness, that triggered a memory that I have of somebody who I remember seeing when I was 6 years old. This would be back in the 1980s. 1980s. Sounds like Gerald Anderson, doesn't it? He said, I was 6 years old, and there's this fellow that used to, and this fellow lives in Florida. He said, my folks knew a couple that owned this bar, and they used to take me there once in a while. And there was this fellow that would come in, and this is now the 1980s. He said he'd be talking about this case where he was on a flight. He went to a base in Dayton, Ohio, with these little bodies, and he saw them, and the whole thing. So the whole thing had to do with the Roswell bodies. And he said everybody in the bar, the saloon, or whatever that was, they just called this guy Colonel. They don't know what it is. They say, okay, Colonel. But he said, I remember this guy talking about Roswell and these bodies. I said, okay. And the magic question is, what's his name? And he said, well, I just remember his first name being something like George. I said, "Oh, well, that's great. I'll plug George into my super duper browser here and see how many million names of George come up. Would you recognize?" So he said, "No, no, okay, I understand." He says, I'm still friends with the son of the people who owned the bar. I'm still friends with the son. They were both around 6 years old at the time. So he says, I'll find out from him if he remembers the last name of this guy. And so the same day I get a phone call. He says, yes, his last name was either Bumgardner or Bumgarner. But, I said, is that Baumgartner or Bumgartner? He said, I don't know, but it sounded like Bumgardner. Well, I said, okay, let me check my base yearbook. And sure enough, Kevin, there's one Bumgarner, Bumgarner in the yearbook. And he was saying that he couldn't pronounce it right. It's either Gardner or Garner without the D. And sure enough, there's one Bumgarner in the base yearbook from 1947. And I said, okay, I'm with you on this. Now, I can fax you, not fax. Why did I say fax? I don't use the fax.
Tom, let me interrupt you there because I'm going to have to take a break.
Already?
I think I appreciate what you're going to do, and you're probably going to email it to me with an attachment or something like that. I'm here with Tom Carey. We're wrapping up Roswell with his latest information, and I know he's read the information I had from the guy that sort of the same sort of situation where we found this Don Schmitt. Anyway, we'll be back. When we come back, we're going to move away from Roswell into other aspects of ufology and what Tom is doing in the world today.
I want to finish this story, though.
We will do that when we come back. So thank you much, Tom. We will be back right after this, so please stick around. I am back. I had to push the button. I'm with Tom Carey. When we broke off, Tom was talking about Baumgartner. So please continue.
Well, the thing was, Kevin, when he started his story, I already came to the conclusion, oh boy, this is going to go nowhere, because we had, with one name, what am I going to do? Well, he's telling me all this stuff about he said the thing that triggered him was that this fellow had information that he was not familiar with, and he's talking about bio and all that sort of stuff. So we found out the last name was Bumgarner, and it turns out, Kevin, that there's a Bumgarner without a D or a T in the 393rd Bomb Squadron at Roswell in 1947. So there was a Bumgarner there, and that these conversations took place in the 1980s. Before there was only one book out at that time, the 1980 Roswell incident. So they didn't get it from all the books. So I said, okay, we know the last name. He says, but the people who ran the bar or owned the bar, they're very old now, but they're still alive. I said, okay, first I'm going to email you a picture of this guy, which I got from the yearbook. I put it in my magic machine here when I was able to print out the picture, and I sent it to him. I said, does this look like the guy that you saw once or twice at this bar back in the night? He says, well, I was only 6 years old at the time. So he says, I'm not sure. To me, he said, it doesn't look like, I'm not sure. So he says, but what I can do, the old folks who ran that bar are still alive. I'm going to send that picture, or it sounded to me like he was going to take it to them because they also live in Florida. So these people live in Florida. He says, so now I'm going to take them because they knew this guy very well. They knew him. So I'm waiting now for a result of that trip to where the old folks are, to look at that picture of Bumgarner from the 47 yearbook. If that's the guy, we have something. If it isn't the guy, forget what I just said. So that's where I'm at right now. The person I was talking to, he says, I'm 6 years old at the time. I tell you what I remember, and it had something to do with information about Dayton, Ohio, and Wright-Patterson, and bodies in Roswell. And whenever I get a lead that has to do with the bodies, even now that I'm out of the business now, it goes right to the top of my basket, which was empty. So it went right to the top of my empty basket. So I'm following through. I guarantee you, I will let you know what happens on this.
Well, I appreciate that. And I can put it up on my blog and maybe get some people to take a look at what's going on.
Yes.
But
I was going to ask you if you had ever come across a Bumgarner in your
no.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like this Dalton Schmitt guy that just appeared and I've mentioned on the program, and I've told you, he's not in the yearbook, but he's in the base phone book. And I was looking at the base phone book. He was a major at the time, and I said, well, his phone number is 312 on the base. And so I was going to look for other phone numbers with 312 to see what association he might have. It give me an idea where he was. And of course, Jesse Marcel's phone number was 312. So he's like in the office with Jesse Marcel. We'd never heard the name, never had come up in any of the discussions. And here's a guy who was shared an office with Jesse Marcel.
So,
course,
what became what?
Well, he died. The guy died in 10, 12 years ago. So there's nothing I can do about it. It was just somebody. Well, he said I was in this discussion with my friend, and he was talking about this Dalton Schmitt guy, or I guess he knew Dalton Schmitt. He knew Dalton Schmitt, and he just contacted me and said, was he really there? What and that sort of thing. And I looked the information up, and there's this guy in the office with Jesse Marcel. You remember the guy named Brees, who was, I guess, in the office with Marcel, but his phone number is associated with the operations of one of the squadrons. So he's not got this close association the Smith guy did. Now here was a lead we could have used 20 years ago, but
yes,
there's nowhere else to go.
Did this Dalton fellow die recently, or was it?
He died about a decade ago. And you look him up on the internet and you can find some information about him, which is what I did. I put all the information I had up on my blog.
So there was no further information beyond that. He worked in
the guy that contacted me was surprised I was able to learn that he worked in the same office with Jesse Marcel. And it was the old trick. If you watch the movie All the President's Men, and they've got the big list of who everybody is and their phone number, the phone numbers, the office phone numbers. It says find somebody else with the same phone number that's close by, and it might take you in the direction. So I'm thinking, well, I'll see where this phone number takes me, and it took me right to Jesse Marcel. I mean, this is a lead we could have used so long ago.
Right.
But I think that kind of exhausts Roswell. And I thought, and I know you're a big fan of abductions. So I wanted to get your take on abductions. I know you haven't done a lot of research on it, but when you're in the UFO field, all this stuff kind of rains down on you, and you can avoid it or not. I know a great deal about abductions and cattle mutilations and crop circles and all these things. I think are pretty nonsensical.
Kevin, I only had so much time available, and all of my time was taken with Roswell is labor intensive. It's labor intensive, and abductions to me, whether it something like sleep paralysis or something like that. I will tell you this. My wife and I, David Jacobs.
Yes.
I don't get this. My phone doesn't ring unless I'm talking on the. David Jacobs invited myself and Doreen to a one of his get-togethers of all the people. What is?
Ignore your phone, Tom.
Okay.
We're over here.
So. He had this get-together of all the alleged abductees, some sort of. It wasn't like a party; it was just a get-together one Saturday. So Doreen and I went, and we were struck by all of the male alleged abductees had the same demeanor. And all of the female abductees seemed to us to have mother-daughter problems. And I mean, they all had the same symptoms to us of this and that. And so at least I made the conclusion, oh, this is what's going on. It's not maybe being taken away somewhere by somebody from another world. It's that the women have problems with their mother. All of them did. And the men, all to me, were of a certain persuasion, to say.
Well, let me help you out here, Tom. When Bill Cohn and Rob Estes, when we were looking at the abduction phenomena, we interviewed some 316 people. And what we learned was that there was a disproportionate number of homosexuals in the abductee population, which is not to say anything pejorative about homosexuals or anything like that. It's just an observation based on our discussions with the people who were involved, interviewing the abductees. And when we explored it a little bit further, what we learned was that, well, it was just that there was too many in there, and it seemed that I trying to say it nicely because they don't mean anything pejorative about it, but the homosexual population was overrepresented in the abductee population, and we thought there would be some kind of connection between the two populations, and we wondered about other sort of invisible aspects. Are there too many people who are left-handed, or too many people with a certain blood type?
You and I, for your listener, we have never talked about this. We have never talked about this, but that was my observation and my wife's observation from David Jacobs' get-together. And I've never said anything about it all these years, but that was my observation, that they were
overrepresented.
Yes.
And that was the thing. I brought this up in other arenas and been castigated for mentioning this. You're just homophobic.
That's why I didn't bring it up.
I'm making a scientific observation based on 316 interviews with the abductees, and it was Russ Estes and Bill Cohn who originally came up with this. And looking at the tapes and being involved in some of those investigations, I realized this is probably something that should be explored by the abduction researchers, but is not. And we had suggested, again, Russ Estes, Bill Cohn, and I had suggested that what they were doing is case studies. And we needed to move the abduction research from case studies. We had enough of those. We needed to move it to another arena to see if we could solve the problem. And I'm convinced that there are very few alien abductions, if there are any. I look at, I was going to say Travis Walton, but there's kind of unraveling in the last year or so. But Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson seems to be a much more solid case. I'm going to break. I think we're done with that.
That's interesting, though, because you and I have never talked about this. And my observation is based on the one afternoon that I spent with David Jake.
Well, we're going to have to come back in just a moment. We'll be talking about that. I'm going to ask Tom about cattle mutilations briefly, and then I want to get into what he is doing in today's arena, what has captured his attention, because he's mentioned to me a couple of times he's got some good projects or some new projects that excite him, and I want to talk about those. As usual, take a look at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And just for fun, I'm going to mention the Leveland book. I think that Leveland is an important case, and you get a chance, take a look at the book. And please give it a rating or a review, because that always helps. We will be back right after this, so please stick around. And I am back. We'll be talking, we are talking to Tom Carey. I think we've kind of exhausted all of this sort of thing, and I know that you wanted to talk about what your new projects are and what's exciting you today. So I know you've got two of them. So have at it. What's your excitement for today?
Just to put a period on what we were talking about, the abductions. I did, I never spoke of it because I didn't want to give the impression that I was being prejudiced or anything like that. But it was just an observation that I made.
Well,
Maybe
and we kind of underscored it with scientific data with the research we had done.
I appreciate that, because all these years I've been thinking, well, maybe I was being too critical or something like that, but that was my observation. And Doreen, for herself, she noticed, or her observation was, for the females there always seemed to be some sort of mother relationship conflict of some sort. So I'll just leave that. Abductions, I have basically no interest in, Kevin. So the what was
your projects?
Oh, my projects, yes. For decades, I've read my first book about Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, when I was in graduate school at the University of Toronto. And the book was about how the Roosevelt administration, most notably FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that they not only knew about the impending attack, they knew where it was going and coming, and that they may have even engineered itself. I read that book in 1974. I was in Toronto, and you will never guess, and I didn't know that until years later, who the editor of that book was. None other than Carl Flock was the editor of that book. If I had known that, I'd have been friends with Carl. I said, Carl.
Let me interrupt right here. So for the audience, Carl Flock is kind of the anti-Roswell investigator. He's had a long history in UFOs. He worked at one point with the CIA as a case officer. I knew Carl Flock for a number of years, and we had some very nice discussions and things like that. But he was heavily involved in UFOs, and he was heavily involved in cattle mutilations, which we didn't get to. So Carl Flock was the editor of the book that you were fascinated by, Pearl Harbor.
It was published by Regnery, which is a conservative publication outfit in Washington, D.C., Regnery book. And it was written by a fellow named Bruce Bartlett, who wrote for National Review, the big conservative magazine that comes out regularly, William Buckley's old publication. So I called up Bruce Bartlett one day, and I wanted to first congratulate him on something that caught, like Roswell, caught my attention. And he could not hang up the phone fast enough. I'm thinking, why? The book was actually an expansion of his master's thesis at Columbia, and I was giving him, but he couldn't hang up fast enough for me. So since then, Kevin, because that subject has captured my attention in 1974, I have gotten a hold of every book about that subject, the attack on Pearl Harbor, and I've bought every book I can think of that has been published. The first one came out in 1946, 1 year after the war ended. The first book on, okay, FDR, folks, it's not what you think. Something was going on there to get us into World War II, the so-called backdoor to getting into the war. And
Tom, let me interrupt you here because I have a question. If I remember correctly, back in the 1930s, when they played war games, the general officers, the admirals, and everybody, how do we get into what would happen if this scenario? And it always began
Case
with
Orange.
Yes, I was going to say, and they always began with an attack, a surprise attack at Pearl Harbor. Yes. And I wondered how that might play into that.
Well, logistically, I guess it made sense. If we had our fleet based there, that would be a logical. It's not an arcane thought that if have committed that you're going to go to war with the United States in the Pacific, and their fleet is based at Pearl Harbor, and they are really the only obstruction you have to expanding your empire in, say, the Philippines and Malaysia. And you've got to do something about the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. It's not an arcane subject that a lot of the people say, oh, they had no idea. Well, right off the top of my head, that would be one of my first thoughts. Okay, what are they going to attack our fleet at Pearl Harbor? That would be one of my primary thoughts. Well, like you said, as far back as Billy Mitchell in the 1920s, when they were just starting to convert some ships to aircraft carriers, because he was a big proponent of air power from aircraft carriers. And near the end of his career, I think they court-martialed him. And
Yes, they did.
Near the end of his career, they said, "Well, what do you think is going to happen in the future?" I can't remember if he made general or not.
Yes, he was a brigadier general, and then what happened was he wanted to demonstrate the power of aerial assault on battleships. And
the Ostfriedland, he sunk.
And the Navy set it up so that it was almost impossible to sink them. And in the last bombing run, they came in lower than they were supposed to, and they sank the battleships with their airplanes. And he was court-martialed for disobeying his orders.
Yes,
so from brigadier general to colonel.
Yes, you can't do that. You can't sink our battleships. Oh, you came in too low. Oh, no enemy would do that, right?
Yeah.
So one of his final statements was that he expected a future war with the Japanese Empire, or Japan, with an attack starting, surprise attack, probably on a Sunday morning at Pearl Harbor. And that was like in the 1920s. And the future deployments of the Pacific Fleet in testing what that we called Case Orange, it was sort of anticipating an attack from the northwest of Hawaii, which is where it ultimately came from. So I've got all these books. They call them revisionist history. It's like, oh, folks, it's not real history. It's revisionist history. I'm sorry, folks, but it's history that has not been recorded adequately. And my project is to bring all of these together, because there's a book here and a book there and a book starting in 1946, Kevin, the first book by a fellow named Morgenstern. And it's that thick about the attack on Pearl Harbor that it's not what people were led to believe totally. And it's caught my imagination. I figure my project will take, I hope I finish it before I check out. That's my belief about it.
Well, let me direct you back to another question. You talked to the publisher, Carl Flock's boss, the book that got you started on this. Did you ever communicate with him again?
No, he was Flock, or the boss.
The boss.
No, because
the guy who wrote the book.
He was so angry with me that I called, that because he was still writing for National Review at the time. And it caught me by surprise. I mean, so somebody calls you up, Kevin, and says, "Oh boy, I really like that book. You're in a positive disposition, right?" And this fellow was, why are you calling? Well, because you wrote that book in 19. Well, yes, I did. I thank you. Goodbye. And I'm thinking, what's the story here? So I can only think it's because he was a columnist for National Review and an online columnist, and that he just didn't want to be associated with something, because the company. This is what happens when you get old. You start tripping over your words. The country is so polarized today that you can't say anything like that, because you're castigating a Democratic icon. FDR could do no wrong. Well, okay, he helped us win World War II. I'm just talking about how we got into the war. And you can't criticize FDR. Even the Republicans, he was wonderful. He was just great. Well, one of the icons, he was a great author and historian by the name of John Toland, Toland.
I've read some of his books.
He was an icon of historical research until he wrote the book Infamy, which was about the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1980. He wrote a book called Infamy, and all of a sudden his name became mud. I mean, his wife was Japanese, so that was a big advantage. And he had just finished a book called something it had to do with Japan. And oh, what a wonderful book! Oh, thank you, John. Thank you. Oh, what a wonderful book. He writes Infamy in 1980, and all of a sudden he's trash. And I just didn't think that was right. So he's interviewed. Remember, this was on C-SPAN. There was an interviewer named Lamb, Lamb. I forget his first name. Brian Lamb.
Tom, I got to stop you there. We'll come back to Lamb right after this. I'm running out of time here. So we'll be taking a break. Look at my blog, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. I'll be back with Tom, and we'll finish up with Lamb and C-SPAN right after this. So please stick around. And I am back. I'll be joined momentarily by Tom Carey. Tom, when we went away, you were talking about Lamb and some of the things you'd learned. So continue on with that story.
Yes. Brian Lamb, who I think is still alive, I'm not sure, but he used to do an interview show on C-SPAN. And when Toland wrote Infamy, he had him on the show to interview him. And Lamb asks Toland, well, what did you think about FDR? And without hesitating, he said he was a bum. So when they picked Lamb up off the floor at that response, he said, what did you say? FDR was a bum. And that's what I'm thinking, oh, my goodness, this guy, So you can't. It's got to the point you can't even Republicans say FDR. Well, I've gone beyond that. There's even a smoking gun in this case. It's a diary that was written by FDR's Secretary of Defense, or back in those days they called it the Secretary of War, Henry Stimson. And in his diary he said, after a meeting with the FDR, we have to figure out a way to get Japan to fire the first shot without sustaining too much damage ourselves. So that was the thing. So they maneuvered Japan into actually firing the first shot with a big memorandum that the Secretary of State, Cordell Hull, maybe I should have said hell, but Cordell Hull sent to the Emperor of Japan, telling them, well, the only way we can reach an accommodation here is if you get out of China, which is something Japan could at that point could never do. So they knew at that point there was going to be a war, but it was to make them fire the first shot, stand back, let them do it, but hoping that they don't inflict too much damage to us. Well, you saw what they did at Pearl Harbor, and it was way more than they expected, because they thought the water was so shallow at Pearl Harbor they couldn't fire torpedoes from airborne craft. And so, but the Japanese figured out a way to do it, and most of the damage was sustained by torpedoes that they thought that Japan could never fire.
Well, so, if I remember correctly, they put some kind of a wooden apparatus at the end of the torpedo that so it wouldn't go into the great depths that they normally went to.
That's correct. And most of the damage was done by torpedoes. Anyway, that was. I mean, there's so much there, Kevin. It's caught my imagination, just like Roswell. The other project, unless you have another, you want me to go on with that.
No, I was about to say, and your second project is.
you're not going to believe this. You're not going to believe this, and I don't believe it myself, but it's true. Well, in anthropology, I believe your specialty was archaeology, if I recall.
Archaeology and settlement patterns, that sort of thing.
Yes, yes. Mine was physical anthropology, fossil primates and fossil hominids, or early humans. Because of that, I've had a running interest in Bigfoot, the so-called.
Oh my goodness!
Yes, Bigfoot. Because I thought, if it's true, it's a relic. It's a relic hominid because it's bipedal. The things that people describe, and there've been a lot of instances all over the world. They have different names for them, Yowie and abominable snowman and all that sort of stuff. But in America, it's called Bigfoot. So I've had a mild interest in it. I mean, I'm not like, oh, I got to read the next, I'm not obsessed by it or anything, but I would follow it and just to see what the descriptions are. So a couple months ago, my wife, Doreen, who was in a historical society locally, the Montgomery County Historical Society, Bryn Athyn Historical Society, she comes home one night about 3 months ago. She says, I was talking to this fellow at the meeting, and he says he had a Bigfoot encounter right here in Bryn Athyn, or in Bryn Athyn. I'm in Huntington Valley. In Bryn Athyn, about when he was like 15, 16 years old. I said, Bigfoot here? She said, yeah, that's what it sounded like. So I got to interview this guy. So I called him up and I said, I want to interview you, but I want to interview where you had your sighting. So we went to the spot because it's like an hour. It's an hour. There I go again. About a mile and a half from my house, not that far away. Bigfoot, a mile and a half away from my house. I got to see this. So we met at the spot, and I said, okay, tell me your story. And so he tells me what happened, and I'm thinking, this is not Bigfoot. This is something else. It's not Bigfoot. And it sounded like a story that I had heard several times about this thing called the dog man, which is, a canine. It's not a hominid. It's a canid. And the story was so interesting, and it's only a mile and a half from my house. And I found other witnesses. There's a number of other witnesses that have seen this thing, whom I believe. You know yourself, Kevin. You can talk to somebody, whether your gut tells you they're believable or not. These witnesses were believable. And so I interviewed them, and I contacted a fellow by the name of Eric Mintel, Mintel, who's a world-class jazz pianist, but he has this other interest in the paranormal, okay? The Jersey Devil, things like that. But he's a world-class jazz pianist, but he has this other side of him that he does investigations. In fact, he did one recently up in Don Schmitt's territory up in Wisconsin called the Beast of Bray Road. And so he got in. So I called him up. I said, would you be interested in this local sighting we have here? So we're following up on that. We've had a night investigation, and it is. I did not believe in my interest was Bigfoot. It turned out not to be Bigfoot, but it's this other thing that I never put any stock in.
Are you gonna be writing about this anywhere, or is this just?
Yes. Well, we're finishing up a documentary as we speak. We're close to the end of it. I'll send it to you if you want. I see your head just dropped there, and then like
no, there was a note that came by. I had to look at.
But as we speak, we're in fact the documentary might be finished today. so we did a documentary. There was a write-up. If I can get the newspaper write-up, I will send it to you. But I never, I never put stock in these things.
Well, I will tell you my one Bigfoot story, and then we're going to have to break it off. I don't know if you recognize the name Warren Smith. He did a lot of books on UFOs and paranormal and things like that. He was a friend of Brad Steiger.
Yeah.
Sometimes wrote under a different name, which escapes me at the moment.
Kevin Randle.
No, he asked me once, did I ever make up stories? And I said, well, no. And he said, well, he sometimes did to flesh out an article. And he told me about this Bigfoot story that he created in Missouri about 2 college girls who'd seen a Bigfoot. And I'm thinking, well, that's just absolutely great, because that's all we need. We've got this published in a magazine now, which will live forever. And we have to determine whether or not these stories are true. So I think of anything that Warren Smith is involved with, I just ignore, because it's just not worth the time to follow up on it. That's my Bigfoot story for you. Oh,
well,
I know it was helpful.
that's very helpful, especially the unhappy ending that you just ignore it. But
he also wrote under the name Eric Norman. I remembered the name Eric Norman.
Don't know that one either.
Well, if you find stuff from him, just kind of set it aside.
See, the thing is, Kevin, is that if I won the lottery, right, like this some person won a couple $100 million. If I won the lottery, what I would do is, take care of my family, my wife and 2 children. But after that, I would try to sign myself up on in paleontological expeditions and of both of a hominid and primate nature, and even the Mesozoic, the dinosaurs. I love paleontology.
Well, Tom, we're going to have to let it go at that. I'm out of time. Just out of time. I'm sorry. Can't help it. But I enjoyed the conversation. I think it's been interesting, especially the information about Pearl Harbor and the possibility, which the theory I'd heard before. So thank you for showing up. I'll have you back sometime, and maybe we can go a little bit deeper into Bigfoot and the Dogman and the documentary.
I'll let you know what happens.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Next time coming up, I'm going to talk to Chris O'Brien. We're going to be talking about cattle mutilations from the other end, as I think I've mentioned before. He's done a lot of research into the cattle mutilations. He has written a number of books on cattle mutilations, but we'll look at that from his point of view, and I'll ask him some tough questions about it. I've done some research into cattle mutilations simply because I was asked to do it, so we have that. And once again, I'm going to kind of push. I think the book Understanding Roswell provides you with a good perspective of the Roswell case that takes all the nonsense out of it. Here's what we know for a fact. Here's where things go truly. We can ignore this part of the case and this part of the case. Here are the things that help us get there. And I think it will get us to the extraterrestrial, even though we cannot prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. We can get that direction. So as I say, I'll be back here again with Chris O'Brien, and can't really think of much. So thank you for tuning in, and I will chat with you again soon. Thank you.